Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the smoky, mysterious world of Ottoman coffee houses, where time slows, conversations sharpen, and bitter brews steam beneath wooden rafters. Imagine ducking under a low wooden doorway, the air thick with cardamom and roasted beans. Lantern light flickers across embroidered cushions and stained copper trays. There's no menu, no Wi-Fi, and definitely no frappuccinos. Just you, a steaming demitasse, and a sea of bearded men playing chess like they're defusing bombs. You've walked straight into the caffeine-soaked heart of a civilization that took its coffee, and its conversations, very seriously. You might think you're just here to chill, sip, and maybe hear some lute music. But be warned, this isn't your neighborhood cafe. One wrong word in here and you could be accused of sedition. Or poetry. Or both. And don't even think about asking for cream and sugar, you'll be escorted out before your cup cools. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is for you, because if you're here, you probably need the kind of story that lulls you gently into sleep, with just a little bite of historical bitterness on the tongue. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a stone-paved alleyway, the hum of distant prayers fading into the low buzz of conversation. It's Istanbul in the late 1500s. Officially, it's the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Unofficially, it's where the coffee addiction begins to brew. Literally. You nudge open the wooden door of a modest establishment. Inside, the smell of roasted beans hits you like a punch to the nose, sharp, dark, vaguely nutty. Somewhere between scorched hope and morning breath. The first thing you notice, it's loud. Not nightclub loud, more like enthusiastic philosopher loud. Chess pieces clack. Dice tumble across hand-carved backgammon boards. Someone recites poetry. Someone else recites poetry about how much they hate poetry. No one's smiling, but somehow everyone's having fun. And this isn't some tucked-away hangout for a few artsy types. Coffee houses, called kahvehanes in Ottoman Turkish, are everywhere. By the mid-17th century, Istanbul alone boasts hundreds of them, from waterfront shacks to marble-lined palatial lounges. And no, they're not just for sipping and scrolling. These places are the lifeblood of urban conversation. Think Reddit threads, political debates, and stand-up comedy, all compressed into one room filled with smoke and caffeine. You squeeze between two low tables and find an empty stool, the cushion frayed from centuries of thinkers, gamblers, and outlaws. A young man brings you a tiny cup with no handle. It's thick, almost syrupy, with gritty sediment at the bottom like caffeinated quicksand. That, my friend, is Ottoman coffee. Not brewed like the filtered stuff we know, but slowly boiled over hot coals in a long-handled brass jezve. It's more a potion than a drink. You sip it, and immediately regret not preparing your taste buds. It's intense, earthy, and unapologetically bitter. No sugar. No milk. Just the bean, the water, and your ability to fake enjoyment. You cough quietly. A man next to you nods approvingly. Apparently, that's the correct reaction. Now take a look around. Notice something? Everyone here is male. Ottoman coffee houses are overwhelmingly male-only spaces, at least in public. Not because women didn't like coffee, oh, they loved it, but because the social rules said their place was at home. That said, don't underestimate the home-brewed power of the harem. Historians still argue whether women's coffee rituals at home were just as influential, if not more, than the loud, smoky spaces outside. Let's just say power brews in quiet corners too. Back in your cafe, you lean in closer to the murmured conversation beside you. They're talking politics, quietly, carefully, like someone might be listening. Because someone always is. These coffee houses are places of connection, yes, but also of suspicion. The walls don't have ears, but the men next to you might. And yet, this is what made them thrilling. The empire was vast, its power centralized, its rulers distant. But here, in this cramped room with peeling murals and a cracked mirror in the corner, people talked about everything, from taxes to theology to whether the Sultan had lost his mind again. It was dangerous. It was addictive. It was very Ottoman. Your cup is half empty, or half full, depending on your mood, and someone is passing around a plate of candied dates, the only sweet thing on offer. No pastries, no syrup-drizzled cakes. Ottoman coffee culture wasn't about indulgence. It was about stimulation. Intellectual, emotional, and occasionally legal. A man across the room strums a saz, a stringed instrument that sounds like a banjo on vacation. He starts a song that seems to be about heartbreak, war, and goats, all at once. You're not sure if it's supposed to be funny or tragic. Probably both. In the far corner, under a faded mural of Alexander the Great looking deeply unimpressed, an old man tells a story about a janissary who drank 40 cups of coffee before going into battle. This is probably an exaggeration. But in this place, exaggeration is an art form. One scholarly debate that still rages today. Whether these coffee houses were truly democratic spaces or just echo chambers for the literate elite. Some historians paint them as proto-parliaments, others as breeding grounds for gossip and insurrection. The truth probably lies in your coffee grounds, muddy, complicated, and impossible to read clearly. You finish your drink. The sludge at the bottom has congealed into a small mountain. Someone next to you flips his cup over and starts divining his future from the drips down the side. He frowns. Apparently, he's going to be broke and alone next week. Someone offers to trade fortunes for backgammon advice. Deals are made. Games are played. And through it all, the coffee keeps flowing. It's late now. The lantern light has dimmed. A cool draft sneaks under the door, curling around your ankles. Someone yawns. But no one leaves. That's the secret of these places. They aren't just coffee shops. They're worlds. They're theaters. They're pressure cookers for a society that doesn't always get to speak its mind, but desperately wants to. You close your eyes for a second. Just a second. But the chair's surprisingly comfortable. The hum of conversation melts into the background. And even if you don't understand half the words floating through the air, you get the message. Coffee isn't just a drink. It's a ritual. A performance. A declaration that you are awake, aware, and still very much alive in an empire that demands your silence, but can't quite resist your voice. The bitterness still clings to your tongue as you step back outside into the cooler night air. The taste lingers, burnt, earthy, a little rebellious. You blink against the lantern-lit darkness of Istanbul's winding streets, half expecting the coffee house to vanish behind you like a mirage. But no, it's still there, full of voices and steam, refusing to be ordinary. And that's the strange thing. This all started with some goats. Yes, goats. You wouldn't think they'd be central to the story of the world's most obsessive coffee drinkers, but here we are. Picture the highlands of Ethiopia, many centuries before your coffee house adventure. A young goat herd named Kaldi, probably fictional, definitely dramatic, watches his animals bouncing around with unnatural energy after chewing on the bright red berries of a particular plant. Instead of thinking weird, he thinks let's taste it. Classic bad idea. Or perhaps a brilliant one, depending on how you feel about insomnia. From there, the tale winds down into Yemen, where Sufi mystics in the 15th century are said to brew a strong, black drink that helps them stay awake during all-night prayer sessions. Imagine pulling spiritual all-nighters with a mug of crude espresso beside your prayer mat. Devout? Absolutely. Wired? Undoubtedly. And that's how coffee gets its first real foothold, as a divine stimulant. Early Sufi monks treat it like a sacrament, not just a beverage. Brewing it slowly, sipping with intention, chanting through the jittery clarity it brings. It's spiritual Red Bull, with a better aftertaste. The port of Mocha, yes, that Mocha, is the next big player. By the early 1500s, Yemen controls the coffee trade, guarding its beans like they're gold dust. The plants are forbidden to leave the region, and roasted beans are sold boiled, sterile, and incapable of germinating. Smuggling live beans is a literal act of industrial espionage. And yet, the beans escape. Somehow. Somewhere. One mainstream historical fact, it was the Ottomans who turned coffee from a monastic tool into an urban obsession. Sometime around the 1550s, the drink makes its grand arrival in Istanbul, courtesy of two Syrian merchants, Hakem and Sems, who opened the first proper coffee shop in the Tahtakale district. This isn't just someone brewing at home. This is the real deal, public, commercial, and addictive. The place is called Kivahan. It's dark, fragrant, and instantly controversial. You can almost picture it. Smoky rafters. Elaborate tile work curling up the walls. Worn rugs that cushion the clatter of wooden cups. Men in turbans leaning in close. The low murmur of debate spiced with occasional laughter and the sharp tap-tap of game pieces. No baristas shouting names. No drive-through. Just the kind of space where time pauses and arguments simmer longer than the coffee itself. At first, no one knows what to make of it. It's not quite a tavern, no alcohol, no slurred oaths, no impromptu sword fights. It's not a mosque, too much noise, too much caffeine-fueled heresy. And it's not a bazaar, nobody's really selling anything but conversation. But the Ottomans, being both imperial and opportunistic, catch on quickly. By the time the 17th century rolls around, there are coffee houses dotting nearly every major city from Aleppo to Cairo to Sarajevo. They range from rough wooden shacks with straw mats to marble-floored lounges with silken cushions and perfume fountains. Some even come with their own in-house entertainers and script reciters, like Netflix, but brewed. Now, you might be wondering, was everyone happy about this caffeinated explosion? Of course not. Religious scholars, particularly conservative Islamic jurists, start raising their eyebrows. They argue that coffee, like wine, alters the state of mind. It's unnatural. It's disruptive. One cleric calls it the root of all sedition. Another insists it causes infertility, criminal behavior, and, somehow, impotence. That's quite the trifecta for a little bean juice. But the real threat isn't the drink itself. It's what happens when people gather to drink it. For the first time in ages, ordinary citizens are meeting outside the mosque, outside the workplace, outside the family home, and they're talking about taxes, about the Sultan, about how much better things were 3 reigns ago. Coffee doesn't just keep people awake. It wakes them up. You, standing in the imagined queue at one of these places, overhear someone whispering about the Janissaries getting restless. Another man jokes, too loudly, about the Grand Vizier's choice of concubines. There's laughter. And that's the problem. You see, laughter isn't just entertainment in the Ottoman Empire, it's resistance. It undermines. And so, even though the Sultan himself drinks coffee, even though his court is full of elaborate serving rituals in gilded cups with emerald-encrusted saucers, there are constant efforts to restrict, ban, or monitor coffee consumption. Spoiler alert, none of those efforts work for long. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the late 1500s, one paranoid sultan sends his men in disguise to roam the coffee houses of Istanbul, listening for sedition. If they hear any, they report back. If they hear too much, the coffee house might be closed, or burned to the ground. Kind of makes your modern coffee shops out of oat milk sign seem less stressful. So, there's this tension. On one hand, coffee is fueling a vibrant, interconnected, intellectually buzzing society. On the other, it's a source of anxiety for the state. Are these people just drinking? Or are they plotting? Are they playing backgammon? Or rehearsing a coup? Historians still argue whether the Ottoman Empire was strengthened or destabilized by its coffee culture. Did these spaces promote civic engagement and literacy? Or did they just help disgruntled men complain more eloquently about their government? Possibly both. Possibly neither. Possibly that's the whole point of coffee houses, to exist in the jittery in-between where ideas flow faster than facts. You turn back toward the alley, where a row of coffee houses glow with warm lamplight, each one spilling out smoke, stories, and the occasional impromptu poetry slam. Your heart beats a little faster, not just from the caffeine, but from the energy, the movement, the sheer aliveness of it all. This is no longer just a drink. It's a ritual, a lifestyle, a political act disguised as leisure. And you haven't even seen the shadow puppets yet. You duck back into the familiar warmth of another cafe, this one said to be the famous Kivahan, the original, the template, the great-grandparent of every coffee house you've ever scrolled through Yelp to find. It's smaller than you expected. Quieter, maybe. But that's just the calm before the storm of opinions that will inevitably start swirling the moment the next round of cups hits the table. The stools are uneven. The floor is brick. The backgammon board in the corner has been worn smooth by generations of grumbling old men. But this is it, the very space that redefined how Ottomans gathered, spoke, relaxed, and rebelled. You take a seat and try to look like you belong. Everyone here seems to know the rules except you. Don't worry. No one's looking. Someone places a fresh demi-tasse in front of you. The handleless cup is hot to the touch, resting in an ornate metal holder shaped like a tulip. It's thick. Not just the drink, but the moment. You're sipping a revolution one drop at a time. This isn't your average street brew. This is coffee treated like an art form. Brewed slow, poured deliberately, served with an air of theatrical solemnity. There's no foam art, but there is a ritual. The beans are roasted over open flame, ground with a mortar and pestle until they're almost dust, and then stirred into cold water before being brought to a gentle boil, never too fast, over hot sand or coal. You take a cautious sip. It's stronger than anything you've tasted. Thicker than soup. Grittier than regret. And still, they say it's better after the third cup. You wonder if your stomach agrees. Across the room, a game of chess is getting heated. Not in a yelling kind of way, this is Istanbul, not Rome, but in the furrowed brow, dagger eyes, passive-aggressive silence kind of way. Coffee houses were famously full of games, both intellectual and strategic. Chess, checkers, cards, backgammon, they weren't just for fun. They were metaphors for empire, battle, and life. You overhear a guy mumble something about Suleiman's latest campaign into Hungary, followed by a joke about how Hungarian winters are better than Ottoman plumbing. It gets a laugh, quiet, but dangerous. Political humor, like a thick cup of coffee, works best when it's bitter and served slowly. And this is what makes Kivahan special. This wasn't just where men went to drink coffee. It's where they practiced being citizens, thinkers, even critics. The act of sipping from that tiny cup, in public, surrounded by equals, was revolutionary in itself. This was the stage for Ottoman civil society, well, the parts of society that were allowed in, anyway. Quirky historical side note, the stools in early coffee houses were deliberately small and uncomfortable, the idea being that if you were physically uneasy, you'd be mentally sharper. Which is either genius or just really bad interior design. But coffee didn't stay cooped up inside the walls of Kivahan for long. Word spread fast. Before long, coffee houses popped up everywhere, from grand mosques to narrow alleyways, each one slightly different. Some focused on games, others on literature. Some were strictly political, others veered toward the mystical. There were coffee houses for poets, for clerks, for artisans, for soldiers. It was like someone turned the empire into a vast map of espresso-fueled subreddits. Still, not everyone was thrilled. Religious scholars, yes, those again. And some members of the elite worried that coffee houses were eroding traditional hierarchies. After all, inside Kivahan, a tailor could argue with a scholar, and a janissary might trade gossip with a spice merchant. That kind of equality, caffeinated or not, wasn't exactly encouraged by the empire's power structure. Some clerics went as far as declaring coffee an intoxicant, lumping it in with wine and hashish. They even compared its effects to fire in the brain, apt, if you've ever overdone it on Turkish brew. But unlike wine, coffee came with no religious restrictions written in stone. It sat in a gray area. And in the Ottoman Empire, gray areas were where the real stuff happened. Historians still argue whether Kivahan and its descendants were political institutions in disguise or just very animated tea parties. Some call them proto-parliaments. Others say they were echo chambers, where people talked a lot and did very little. One thing's for sure, they kept people talking. And in an autocratic society, that alone was subversive. Meanwhile, the staff of a place like Kivahan weren't just lowly baristas. The head coffee maker, called the Kaifesibas, held real status. In the imperial court, the title came with access to the Sultan himself. Yes, the guy who made your morning pick-me-up might also have been the guy passing royal secrets while spooning out sugar cubes. Allegedly, of course. You finish your third cup. You've now crossed into full Ottoman citizen territory. Your pulse flutters. Your mind races. You're half convinced you could write poetry, join a rebellion, and win a backgammon tournament, simultaneously. This might be how revolutions start, not with swords, but with saucers. Next to you, someone pulls out a book, not a Quran, but a risque love poem written in Persian, passed around like contraband. He recites it softly, as if the walls are listening. They probably are. Then comes the call to prayer from a nearby mosque, floating through the latticework windows like a gentle reminder that, while coffee houses are exciting, the empire still looms above. But here, in this dimly lit corner, there's space. Space to think. To disagree. To laugh. To brew another pot. Because Kivahan didn't just start a trend. It brewed a revolution, one slow, gritty cup at a time. The sun hasn't quite risen yet, but the city is already stretching. Seagulls wheel above domes and minarets. Fishermen shuffle down to the shore, half awake. You? You're already halfway through your fourth tiny cup of jet black coffee, seated once again in the dim but oddly lively comfort of a coffee house. But this time, you notice something. Or rather, you don't notice something. There are no women. In fact, there haven't been any women in any of the coffee houses you've visited so far. Not serving, not sipping, not even walking past the door. It's not just an oversight. It's by design. These places are built for men, by men, as part of a society where the rules of public life are written in strong ink, and one of those rules is clear: women stay home. That's not to say women in the Ottoman Empire weren't drinking coffee. Far from it. They drank plenty. In fact, in private homes and women's quarters, known as the haremlik, coffee culture thrived in its own powerful, fragrant way. But it wasn't public. It wasn't loud. And it definitely wasn't over a heated chess match with a janissary and a court poet. Still, behind those carved wooden screens and inner courtyards, something important was brewing. Because while men gathered in smoky coffee houses to talk politics and poetry, women were sipping their cups in plush interiors, while negotiating marriages, managing family finances, and subtly pulling strings the men never even saw. You settle deeper into your cushion, imagining a household just a few streets away. In the upstairs salon of a wealthy home, a young bride-to-be kneels by a brazier, carefully heating the jezve, the long-handled copper pot used to make the drink. She stirs gently, adds cardamom, lets it foam, but never boil over. She pours it into tiny porcelain cups for her future in-laws, one sweet, one bitter, one deliberately salty. The salty one? That goes to the groom. A test. If he drinks it without grimacing, he's marriage material. If he chokes or complains, he's out. Yes, coffee was used as a compatibility test in arranged marriage rituals. No pressure. And if he passes? The bride's family begins discussing the sayas, the dowry, the gifts, and, most importantly, the family alliances. A tray of bitter liquid becomes a stage for negotiation. Who says coffee wasn't political? You glance around the men's coffee house again. It's quieter this morning. Fewer games, more sleepy nods. One man reads a letter aloud to a friend, its paper thin as onion skin, the script slanted and formal. You wonder who wrote it. A brother? A son? A wife? Because even though women didn't set foot inside the kahvein, their influence wasn't absent. Far from it. Some women of the court had their own private coffee salons, miniature versions of public houses, complete with musicians and storytellers, minus the smoke and the open gossip. And for those with power, wives of viziers, concubines of sultans, matriarchs of merchant dynasties, coffee became both a pleasure and a tool. One mainstream historical fact? In the 17th century, Sultan Murad IV banned coffee entirely. Brutally. His patrols roamed the streets of Istanbul, searching for secret drinkers. First offense? A beating. Second offense? Death. Sounds extreme? It was. And yet, even then, coffee didn't disappear. Especially not in the harem. Historians still argue whether Murad's ban was truly about the drink, or more about the power of gathering, of exchanging ideas. He didn't just fear caffeine jitters, he feared rebellion. And coffee houses, male or female, were where rebellions quietly began. In fact, when the valid sultan, the sultan's mother, wanted to influence court politics, she'd often do so over a delicate tray of coffee. A visiting dignitary? A potential ally? He'd be summoned to the private chamber, offered a demitasse, and politely interrogated by a woman who technically had no political title, but wielded enough behind-the-scenes power to make viziers tremble. And it wasn't just the elite. Even middle-class Ottoman women formed coffee circles. In smaller homes, neighbors would gather in a different kind of coffee house, one behind closed doors, where gossip was traded as freely as sugar cubes, and community was brewed one visit at a time. You return your cup to its tiny saucer. It makes a satisfying ceramic clink. The man across from you sighs and stands to stretch. The room is starting to fill again. And already the chatter is shifting from dreams and weather to politics and prices. A young boy slips through the door with a tray of fresh beans from Yemen. He moves between tables like a ghost, barely noticed. But you watch. He stops at the back, where the kahvesibaz is already sorting beans by hand, removing the cracked ones, the pale ones, the broken ones. Every bean matters. Every cup matters. This isn't just a drink. It's a ritual, whether it's performed in public, in the shadows, or in a silk-draped salon behind the harem's closed doors. A quirky fact? In Ottoman law, a woman could divorce her husband for failing to provide enough coffee. Yes, really. If he didn't keep her properly caffeinated, she had legal grounds to end the marriage. Makes that for better or worse vow sound slightly more intense, doesn't it? You lean back, letting the murmur of the room wash over you. For all its rigid gender roles, for all its exclusionary norms, the empire couldn't keep coffee in a single box. It leaked. It traveled. It crossed thresholds and power lines. It slipped through cracks in the social fabric. And you realize, maybe the women weren't excluded from coffeehouse culture. Maybe they simply brewed their own. The door swings open with a creak as another man steps in, brushing dust from his cloak. You catch the scent of roasted beans still clinging to the folds of his fabric, like he's walked through a dozen other coffee houses before reaching this one. The room barely acknowledges him, just a few nods, a grunt or two, but you can feel it, something is off today. The atmosphere feels charged, dense, like the foam rising on an untended pot of coffee, moments before it spills. You shift in your seat as the conversation around you sharpens. No more gossip about neighbors or sheep prices. Today, they're whispering about a proclamation from the mosque's pulpit, delivered just this morning: coffee is forbidden. Again, this isn't the first time. You're now in the early 17th century, and the empire is having one of its periodic caffeine-induced panic attacks. Religious leaders, particularly those who follow the more conservative schools of Islamic law, are calling coffee haram, sinful. They say it clouds the mind, weakens the soul, promotes idleness, and leads men to challenge divine order. And worst of all, they say, it makes people talk. It's a familiar tune. As far back as the 1500s, coffee has been banned, unbanned, then banned again. Like a child sneaking out of bed after being tucked in. Each time, the justification changes slightly. Sometimes it's labeled an intoxicant, lumped in with wine or opium. Other times, the focus shifts to morality. Coffee houses are accused of fostering laziness, disrespect, or even sodomy. Historians still argue whether that was genuine concern or just a convenient moral panic. But beneath all those justifications is something simpler: fear. Because in truth, it's not the drink that terrifies the state, it's the assembly. A room full of ordinary men with warm cups and sharper tongues? That's a threat. Especially when they start reciting poetry about corrupt officials, or praising long-dead rulers, or joking about the Sultan's newest wife. The man who's just entered today brings word that the new Sihul Islam, the empire's chief religious authority, has issued a new fatwa. Coffee, he says, is satanic. He compares it to black bile, the bodily humor associated with melancholy, madness, and brooding insurrection. You glance at your cup, now half full, and wonder if it's plotting something. In response, you hear stories from the other men at your table. One tells of the time janissaries, elite soldiers of the empire, stormed a coffee house in disguise, ears open, sabers hidden. Another recalls when Sultan Murad IV, infamous for his iron grip and blood-chilling purges, disguised himself to wander the city. If he found you sipping coffee during a ban? Execution. No trial. No warning, just finality. And yet, the coffee houses never closed for long. They ducked underground. They went mobile. Vendors pushed carts through alleys, serving secret sips in alleyways, behind bathhouses, even from boats along the Bosphorus. You imagine leaning over the edge of a dock, reaching for a steaming cup from a hidden hand in the dark. The resistance is hot and bitter, just like the brew. Quirky tidbit: during one crackdown, coffee drinkers reportedly used hollow walking sticks to hide and sip their coffee in public without being seen. A sort of caffeine-flavored spy gadget. Move over, James Bond. You take another sip. The room is oddly quiet now. No one has stopped drinking, but the laughter has dulled to a hum. The dice still roll, but softer. Every clink of ceramic sounds too loud. Someone adjusts their sash. Someone else pretends to read but hasn't turned a page in 20 minutes. And still, the kahvesibas keeps pouring. Because for every edict that tried to shut down coffee houses, there was a sultan or vizier or court scholar who couldn't go a day without their morning fix. The palace itself ran on coffee, ritualized, glorified, and absurdly luxurious. The imperial coffee makers were elevated to court titles. Their brewing technique was seen as a symbol of refinement and grace. Even ambassadors from Europe marveled at the tiny, ornate cups served on golden trays by men in embroidered silk vests. Historians still debate whether the bans were ever meant to truly eliminate coffee, or if they were simply tools to reassert control, to remind the people that even pleasure, even warmth, even leisure, must be regulated. Because what is a coffee house, really, if not a mini democracy? A place where no one owns the conversation, and ideas percolate freely, maybe too freely for some. You shift again. There's a new storyteller at the far end of the room. His voice is soft, like a lullaby, but he's describing something brutal. A public punishment outside the Bayezid Mosque for a man caught operating an illegal coffee shop in his basement. According to the tale, the authorities confiscated not just the cups and coals, but the man's entire set of furniture. Why? Because if you had a stool, a cushion, and a place to rest your cup, that was proof of intent. Intent to brew. Intent to speak. Intent to resist. You glance around. No one looks scared. They look resigned. Like they've seen this before. Because they have. And they know that tomorrow, the ban will still be there. But so will the coffee. And sure enough, the old man in the corner taps his cup on the table. It's a signal. The Kahvesibas nods once, ducks behind a curtain, and returns with a new tray. Hot, fragrant, defiantly dark. No one cheers. No one claps. But everyone drinks. Because the empire can ban coffee all at once. But you can't unbrew a culture. The morning deepens into late afternoon, and the golden light spills through the wooden shutters like warm syrup. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, swirling between the carved wooden columns and gently smoking coals. The coffee house is full now, not crowded, but dense. Thick with sound. Thick with words. You notice it first in the cadence of conversation. Faster, tighter. The pauses grow longer, not out of laziness, but care. What's being said now is not just idle chatter. It's calculated. You've stumbled into the Ottoman Empire's version of a social media feed, and it's alive, pulsing with rumor and dissent. The man beside you leans in and says, "Did you hear about the governor in Bursa? Gone. Just vanished." Across the room, another whispers, "They say the Grand Vizier poisoned his own cousin." Over a coffee tray, someone coughs. Another pair of eyes flick toward the door. Welcome to the Ottoman gossip engine. Coffee houses, by now, are less about the drink and more about the data. You don't come just to sip, you come to know. To listen. To float your ideas and test their weight. In a time without newspapers or broadcast news, coffee houses are the first stop in the empire's information supply chain. And just like today's comment sections, they're messy, unreliable, often absurd, but strangely powerful. The people who run them are more than baristas. They're gatekeepers of information. The Kahvesibas hears everything: who's rising at court, who's fallen out of favor, who's been sent to the provinces, or worse, not sent, just disappeared. He knows which storyteller is banned this week, which scholar is suddenly ill, and which minor poet is secretly writing invective against the Sultan. You sip your coffee slowly and try to blend in, but it's hard not to listen. That table near the window? They're quoting a line from a banned epic. Over in the corner, two young men lean close, their hands twitching over a parchment map of some province too far from Istanbul to matter, unless it suddenly does. And then, a performer arrives. Not a singer, not a dancer. A poet. He stands up, a little awkward, and starts reciting from memory. His voice is low, his beard ragged, but his words land like stones skipping across a still lake. He speaks in metaphor, of course. A lion devours a fox in the moonlight. A fisherman casts his net and pulls up vipers. A cup of coffee goes cold while the servant poisons the well. No one claps. They just nod, murmur, lean in closer. Quirky tidbit: some Ottoman coffee houses actually employed muhaversaler, professional conversation starters. Their job? To seed discussions, to provoke debate, to keep the intellectual engine humming. Think of them as the human equivalent of a provocative tweet, designed to get people talking, even arguing, but always awake. The empire, of course, isn't blind to this. And so, spies. There's always one in the room. Not in disguise with a fake beard and cloak. No, that would be too theatrical. He's more likely just quiet. Thoughtful. Too thoughtful. He never drinks much, but tips well. Remembers names. Laughs at the right moments. You think back, have you noticed anyone like that today? A debate breaks out at the next table. Soft, but pointed. Two men argue about a land tax recently issued in Anatolia. One says it's necessary. The other says it's theft. Their voices rise and fall like a pendulum. And soon, others join in. A tailor, a spice seller, a retired janissary who still walks like he's in formation. You sit perfectly still, watching how the room turns. The argument ripples, reshapes, and loops back again. Coffee is refilled, tempers smoothed. No punches thrown. But the air? It's hot with thought. Historians still argue whether these debates actually changed anything. Whether the coffee house was a place where action began, or where it ended, a vent, a release valve. Maybe both. Maybe it was where people rehearsed revolution but drank enough coffee to never quite follow through. But sometimes, they did follow through. It's whispered that during the 1656 uprising against the corrupt Grand Vizier Kopregulu Mehmed Pasha, the first signs appeared in coffee houses. Not through banners or speeches, but through murmurs. Someone drew a cartoon on parchment, just a crude ink sketch, but it made the rounds from cafe to cafe, until everyone in the city had seen it. A laughing vizier with a noose for a turban. You'll never find the cartoon now. It was destroyed, banned, forgotten. But the whisper remains. A man sits down across from you now. He says nothing. Just places a piece of paper on the table between you. It's a list of names. Most are unfamiliar. Some are circled. One has a line through it. He nods once, takes his coffee, and vanishes back into the crowd. You stare at the list. You don't understand half of it, but the weight of it presses into your chest. That's what the empire fears. Not the coffee. Not even the ideas. But the organization. The networks that take shape in rooms like this, unofficial, unregulated, uncontainable. Still sipping, you glance at the wall and notice a crude carving in the wood. Even the Sultan cannot stop the tongue. It's signed only with a tiny tulip. A tulip. Like the symbol of beauty and decay. Like the empire itself. Outside, the muezzin calls the afternoon prayer. No one in the cafe moves. Inside, the gossip keeps flowing, thicker and hotter than the coffee. Because in this world, knowledge is currency. And the next great shift in power might already be percolating. Evening rolls in slowly, painting the stone walls in honeyed light. The shadows grow long inside the coffee house, stretching from table legs to hooked copper lanterns that swing gently in the late breeze. You haven't left your seat in hours, and you don't need to. Everything moves around you, cups, stories, glances, rumors, like a tide pulling at the hem of your robe. And now, a new kind of entertainment unfolds. A low clatter signals the arrival of something extraordinary, Karagöz and Hajivat. The shadow puppets. The cafe dims. Someone draws a heavy curtain across the doorway to block the fading daylight, and another man sets up a white sheet stretched across a wooden frame. Behind it, an oil lamp, a small tray of translucent leather cutouts, and the man of the hour, the Hayali, or shadow master. He clears his throat. The room quiets instantly. Even the dice players go still. The puppeteer begins. The first shapes slide across the screen, a tall, clever figure with a neat turban, and beside him, a squat, loud-mouthed man with wild eyes and a belly that seems to wobble, even in silhouette. You don't need to know their names to know who they are. Karagöz is the fool. Hajivat is the straight man. Together, they're the soul of Ottoman satire, sharp, absurd, and beloved across every strata of society. Even the janissaries laugh. Even the poets wince. Their banter begins. Hajivat speaks in flowery Persianized Turkish, like a scholar on his fourth cup of courtly nonsense. Karagöz interrupts with crude jokes and earthy one-liners that make the room erupt with laughter. One of his favorite lines, "Speak Turkish. I didn't come here to read poetry." You laugh too. You can't help it. But beneath the comedy is something else, a coded language. Every gag is a reference, every insult a thinly veiled jab out of his ear, a policy, a ridiculous new tax. When Hajivat praises the glorious government, Karagöz snorts and mutters, "Glorious for those who don't pay rent." And just like that, the crowd knows. They know. This isn't just entertainment. This is commentary. A quirky historical note, shadow plays were sometimes used to communicate censored messages. The Hayali could mock the government, question religious authorities, or ridicule the excesses of court life, all while technically claiming it was just a puppet show. It was the plausible deniability of leather silhouettes and lamplight illusion. You sip your coffee and feel the tension loosen around you. The crowd is leaning forward now, caught in that perfect balance of comedy and critique. Karagöz insults a pompous scholar, and the table behind you slaps their knees in joy. A minute later, Hajivat laments the rising price of meat. "I tried to buy a sheep and was offered its shadow instead." The crowd groans. It's too real. Historians still argue whether shadow puppetry in coffee houses had real political impact or was just escapist entertainment. Some claim it served as a cultural pressure valve, a safe outlet for public frustration. Others insist it was a vehicle for underground resistance, planting seeds of discontent one laugh at a time. But here's what matters to you now, in this moment. These puppets aren't powerless. Their jokes echo. Their metaphors linger. And when the show ends, no one speaks for a full minute, just the creak of the curtain being drawn back. the crackle of coals in the brazier, and the faint ink of porcelain on wood. You glance at the Shadow Master as he packs up. He's older than you expected. Quiet, unassuming. He receives a few coins, a polite nod, then slips out the back like fog through a keyhole. Someone breaks the silence. That bit about the governor's son and the donkey. He chuckles. Did you hear that last week the real son did fall off his horse? Broke his leg. A ripple of murmured amusement. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Caragos knows more than he lets on. You notice the Kavesibus standing near the hearth now, arms crossed. He's watching the room, not like a host, but like a conductor. Making sure the rhythm never stalls. Too quiet, and suspicion grows. Too loud, and the authorities might take notice. It's a delicate balance, and he's been keeping it for years. By the doorway, two men slip away quietly. One adjusts his cloak. You think you've seen him before. Or maybe you haven't. Paranoia, like steam, settles invisibly. And then someone stands and announces a poem. It's not planned. It never is. But there's a moment, a hush, a readiness, and the poet begins. It's a ghazal. Full of yearning and metaphor, the kind that talks about unfaithful lovers but is secretly about bad governance. He compares his beloved's indifference to a minister's broken promise. Her coldness to a winter without firewood. Her departure too. Well, you get it. Everyone gets it. You've never heard a room so still. When he finishes, no applause. Just the sound of spoons stirring in cups. The ritual of yes, we hear you without having to say a word. This is what Ottoman coffee houses do best. They transform every performance, every joke, puppet show, poem, and sigh, into a coded conversation. One that slips past the censors, but never past the people. You drain your cup. The sediment clings to the sides like ink that never made it to paper. Outside, the city's call to prayer echoes again. This time the sunset call. And as the muezzin's voice fades, you realize something. You've been here for an entire day. A full cycle of light and shadow, laughter and silence, ritual and rebellion. And somehow, you still want one more cup. Night falls like velvet, thick and slow, wrapping Istanbul in its folds. Outside the coffee house, the streets are quieter now, save for the occasional clop of hooves or the soft hush of slippers over stone. Lamps glow behind latticed windows. Smoke spirals gently from chimneys and rooftop braziers. Inside, the coffee house has taken on a different rhythm, slower, more thoughtful. The bright bustle of morning debates and puppet shows has softened into quiet circles of men hunched close, their cups steaming gently as they swap stories that don't always need punchlines. You're still here, somehow. It doesn't feel strange. You've become part of the furniture, seasoned, steeped, and comfortably ignored. This is when the intellectuals arrive. They trickle in with the confidence of men who know the best ideas only come after dark. Not the clerics or court scholars. They keep their debates locked in madrasas and libraries. No, these are a different breed. Translators, teachers, poets too rebellious for the palace, astrologers who can quote Aristotle and Al-Ghazali in the same breath. Most of them couldn't afford a sultan's banquet. But here? They reign. A tall man with ink-stained fingers settles at a corner table. He's got a stack of parchment and a quill, and his eyes scan the room before he begins to write. Not hurried. Not anxious. Just recording something. Maybe everything. You wonder if you're in his notes. Across from him sits a younger man with a foreign accent. Greek, maybe. Or Armenian. He's translating something, Latin. By the look of the script. They lean toward each other, cups untouched, muttering in a blend of languages that probably isn't sanctioned anywhere. It's beautiful. This is the Ottoman coffee house as library, as salon, as forbidden seminar. One mainstream historical fact, by the 18th century, many coffee houses in Istanbul and other major Ottoman cities became informal hubs for scholars and autodidacts. They were places where banned texts were read aloud, maps pored over, and languages quietly passed from teacher to student. No textbooks, no desks. Just minds. You sip slowly. The coffee is colder now but still potent. Across the room, someone is sketching in charcoal, plans for a new aqueduct, or maybe just a dream of one. You're not sure. He's arguing with another man about weight distribution and incline. Their debate is passionate but friendly, like chess players who know the real battle is with gravity, not each other. Next to you, a man with a finely groomed beard is discussing the poetry of Rumi. Not the soft, clipped versions you find stitched onto throw pillows in modern gift shops, but the full, complex, ecstatic verses that tremble with spiritual hunger and metaphysical defiance. He quotes, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" Someone responds with a line from Hafiz. Then another man counters with something Greek, prompting a brief but spirited argument about Plato's views on the nature of the soul. It's all absurdly civil. Quirky tidbit: one coffee house in Edirne was nicknamed the Astronomer's Roost because every Friday night, a group of amateur stargazers gathered there to discuss celestial movements, and how they might affect grain prices, marriages, or the likelihood of palace coups. Their charts were hand-drawn, their conclusions dubious, but their passion? Unmistakable. Back in your corner, the talk has shifted to politics, but from a safer distance. They're not discussing the current sultan or his viziers. Instead, they're dissecting the downfall of past regimes. You hear names like Bayezid, Salim, and Mehmed passed around like characters in a tragic novel. Each man offers his theory, complete with metaphors about crumbling pillars and rotting fruit. None of them say it outright, but everyone knows the subtext. History is just the polite way to talk about the present. Historians still argue whether these intellectual enclaves actually influenced Ottoman policy or simply echoed among themselves like voices in a cave. Some believe they were vital to preserving independent thought during periods of heavy censorship. Others argue that they only served the elite, the educated, the connected, the safe. But here, now, surrounded by murmured Arabic, Greek, Persian, and Turkish, you see something else. These men are building a different kind of empire, one made not of land or armies, but of thought. It's messy, multilingual, and entirely undocumented. Yet somehow, it feels more permanent. The Kahesibas watches from behind his brazier, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He knows tonight is a good night. No arrests, no spies. Just the quiet, controlled chaos of caffeine and curiosity. You get up to stretch and walk slowly past a table littered with stray notes. One catches your eye, a list of idioms being translated from Arabic into Turkish. Beside each phrase is a strange symbol, a tulip, again. You're starting to think it means something. Maybe it's a name. Or a signal. Or a joke. No one seems in a hurry to leave. The candles are still full. The coffee still flows. And somehow, the empire, so vast, so rigid, so seemingly eternal, is being gently reshaped in the margins, one quiet conversation at a time. You sit down again, warmed not just by the brazier's heat but by the sense that you've stumbled into something important, not grand, not dramatic, but steady and persistent. Like water carving stone. And tomorrow? The same men will be back. With new ideas. New translations. New rumors. Maybe even new coffee, because knowledge, like the grounds at the bottom of your cup, never truly disappears. It just settles. And waits. The oil lamps flicker low now, casting amber shadows that dance along the carved wooden walls. Outside, Istanbul has surrendered fully tonight, its domes lost in darkness, its alleys quiet but never truly still. The city hums beneath the surface like a slumbering beast, and inside the coffee house, you feel its pulse and the steady rhythm of spoons on porcelain. You're not alone in feeling it. Tonight, the patrons lean in closer. Not from cold, but from caution. Their voices lower. The topics shift. This isn't the scholarly murmur of poets and astrologers anymore. This is something grittier, sharper. This is the realm of the Janissaries. You've heard the stories all day, about their might, their mystery, their shifting loyalties. And now here they are, three of them, seated at a back table, broad-shouldered, bearded, and unmistakable. Even without their military sashes, they carry themselves like men used to commanding silence. The Janissaries were the elite, originally enslaved Christian boys turned fierce Ottoman warriors, loyal only to the Sultan. Or so the official line went. But by the 17th century, they had become something much murkier, a private army, a political machine, a union of brutes with grievances and grievances with muscle. Tonight, they're not wearing armor. They're sipping coffee. And they're listening. At first, you think they're just part of the background. But then you notice the room orbits them. Conversations swirl around their silence, cautious and deliberate. Everyone speaks a little softer when the Janissaries are near. You hear one of them mutter something about bad grain again at the port. Another nods. Same at Galata. The merchants are cheating. Or someone's letting them. His companion doesn't speak, just drums his fingers on the rim of his cup. It sounds almost like a code. This coffee house, like many others, is their home. A place to relax, yes, but also to watch. To plan. To signal. Because in the Ottoman world, janissaries aren't just soldiers. They're political actors. They back sultans. They remove sultans. And more than once, they've started revolts that boiled over from the very kinds of overheard comments you're hearing now. One mainstream historical fact? In 1622, the janissaries helped depose and murder Sultan Osman II, partly because he attempted to modernize and weaken their power. They considered it betrayal, and they didn't hesitate to act. They were angry then, they look angry now. But why coffee houses? Why not the barracks or palace quarters? Because here, surrounded by civilians, their presence means something. It's a message, a warning, and sometimes a recruitment drive. Quirky fact, some coffee houses were unofficially aligned with specific janissary regiments. They'd hang subtle flags, paint insignias on their walls, or simply make it known which OTA, barracks division, ran the place. You ordered your coffee carefully in those spots. Asking for sugar might imply political allegiance. You notice the kahasib is slipping behind the brazier again. He adds extra cloves to the brew now, a traditional gesture meant to show respect when soldiers are present. The aroma thickens. You wonder how many other signals you've missed tonight. A storyteller begins to speak again, this time older, gruffer, his voice rasped from years of smoke and caution. He starts spinning a tale about a falconer whose bird refuses to fly. But the falcon, of course, is a metaphor. Everyone knows. Everyone listens. And when he says, even chained, a bird remembers how to hunt, the room goes completely still. Historians still argue whether the janissaries were the guardians of Ottoman stability or the seeds of its eventual decline. Some claim they were the only real check against royal tyranny. Others see them as corrupt enforcers who sold their swords to the highest bidder and turned coffee houses into dens of intimidation. The truth? Like everything else in the empire, it's a swirl of both. One of the janissaries stands now. He stretches, smooths his coat, then drops a coin, far more than the cost of his drink, onto the tray. He looks around, not menacing, but meaningful. A single nod. Then he's gone, vanishing through the doorway like smoke into the street. The room exhales. You glance at your cup. It's cold. Bitter. And yet, somehow, comforting. Because even in the presence of power, the coffee house holds its own. It doesn't shrink. It adapts. The storyteller finishes his tale. No one claps. No one needs to. Instead, the man beside you mutters, they won't wait forever. You don't ask who they are. You just order another round. Because even in an empire run on whispers, you've learned the language. And tonight, every sip speaks volumes. Midnight has come and gone, and now the coffee house floats in that strange, in-between time. Not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. The oil lamps burn lower. Some men have slumped sideways in their seats, their cups empty but still clutched like talismans. Others sit quietly, eyes half closed, listening to the murmur of the night like it's music composed only for them. You haven't moved in hours, and you feel it in your spine. But still, you stay. You've slipped into the rhythm of this place, where time stretches and softens around the rituals of pouring, sipping, and waiting. And tonight, the conversation shifts again. This time to something more mystical, more inward. A man in a pale wool robe, simple, clean, and worn thin at the cuffs, unrolls a small prayer mat near the back wall. He's not here to preach. He's here to listen. And slowly, others join him, forming a quiet semicircle. They are the Sufis, mystics of Islam, and for them, the coffee house is not just a salon or a strategy room. It is a sanctuary. This is where they come to talk not about viziers or taxes or corrupt governors, but about the soul. You watch as one begins to hum, almost imperceptibly, and the others follow. Not a chant exactly. Not a song. Something else. A thrum, like a heartbeat. Their cups are untouched. The coffee is part of the ritual, but not the center of it. For them, the warmth in the cup mirrors the warmth of divine presence. The bitterness mirrors longing. One mainstream historical fact? Sufis were among the first and most enthusiastic adopters of coffee in the Ottoman world. As early as the 1500s, they used it during nighttime dhikr, remembrance ceremonies, to help keep their minds sharp and their spirits alert during hours of prayer and meditation. And they were also among the first to defend it. When religious authorities tried to ban coffee, it was often Sufi orders who argued for its sacred role, comparing it to incense, to poetry, to light itself. A whisper of incense drifts from one of their robes. Frankincense, or maybe oud. You can't tell. But the room seems to tilt slightly in their direction. The energy slowing, softening. The leader, the one with the worn cuffs, begins to speak in low tones. He tells a parable of a man who travels the world in search of wisdom, only to find it waiting in a humble cafe in his own city. A subtle nod to this very room. A subtle wink at you. Quirky tidbit: there were coffee houses in Istanbul known informally as Sufi cafes, where the walls were decorated with calligraphy, the cups were inscribed with verses, and the air was filled with quiet chanting rather than shouting. Some even had small zikr chambers in the back, where patrons could step in for moments of silent prayer. But Sufis weren't all quiet reflection. Some were fiery poets, some were street performers, some were challengers of orthodoxy. The famous dervish poet Niyazi Misri once declared that drinking coffee while invoking God was the highest form of meditation. Bitter on the tongue, sweet on the soul, he wrote. You take another sip and try to feel that sweetness. It's subtle, but it's there. Historians still argue whether Sufi influence helped normalize coffee in the empire or merely delayed its persecution. Some claim the Sufis elevated coffee to a spiritual plane, giving it the gravitas needed to survive official scrutiny. Others believe their mysticism only made it more suspect to conservative ulama, who saw unregulated emotion as dangerous. You don't know who's right. But in this moment, you see the truth in action. Because even here, between chessboards and shadow plays, between whispers of revolt and quiet translations, the Sufis create a sacred pocket of stillness. Their presence transforms the room, not by shouting or demanding, but simply by being. The Kahesibas knows better than to interrupt. He moves slowly now, a soft rag in one hand, carefully wiping down the copper trays. He replaces the coals with practiced gentleness. The flame lowers, but never dies. At the next table, a man who's clearly had one cup too many stares into his grounds. Not out of drunkenness, there's no alcohol here, but out of deep, sleepy contemplation. He mutters, "I saw the Prophet in my dreams last night." The men beside him nod, not in disbelief, but in understanding. Dreams are currency here, too. You lean back and close your eyes, just for a moment. The hum of the room wraps around you like a blanket, murmured Arabic, the rustle of paper, the soft plink of cooling metal, and the quiet heartbeat of breath in the dark. Outside, a stray cat mews. Inside, a Sufi recites, "When the heart is clean, even bitter water tastes like wine." It's not a performance. It's not even meant for anyone else. But still, someone whispers Amin in reply. And suddenly you realize, this place is a map. Not of roads or provinces, but of the soul of the empire. Its fears, its hopes, its absurdities, and its longings. All poured out night after night in chipped cups, under smoky ceilings, by men who come to be seen, or to disappear. And the coffee? Still warm, still bitter, still sacred. The sky outside has faded from inky black to the deep pre-dawn blue, the kind that whispers rather than announces the coming light. The minarets, silhouetted against the still sleeping city, look less like towers and more like pens poised above a parchment world, ready to write a new day, but waiting for permission. Inside the coffee house, it's quieter than it's been in hours. Not empty, just hushed. You're still here. So are a handful of others, some dozing, others tracing the rims of their cups in slow, thoughtful circles. The candles are stubby, they're wax-pooled. The brazier's coals glow dim and red, like buried rubies. The Kahesibas sits now, finally, legs stretched, head back. Even he needs a moment. And yet, something continues. Even in this exhausted stillness, ideas float. The man next to you is muttering about printing presses. He doesn't mean the ones in Europe. He means here, in the Ottoman Empire. We should have our own, he says, barely louder than a sigh. Books in Turkish, for the people. Not just scholars. His friend raises an eyebrow. You'll be arrested. You're in the early 18th century now, and the empire is bracing itself for modernity. Not fully embracing it, no, never that quickly, but peeking at it from behind velvet curtains. And the coffee house? It's where that curtain flutters the most. This is the age of the tulip period. A time of uneasy flourishing. Of delicate architecture, imported goods, elaborate gardens, and, yes, coffee houses more beautiful than ever. The elite sip from porcelain cups imported from China. The poor drink from clay mugs. But in here, everyone hears the same gossip. The Sultan is obsessed with fountains. The Grand Vizier wears French coats. People are printing poetry pamphlets on illegal presses in Galata. It's a weird, dreamy era. Rich in elegance, poor in certainty. One mainstream historical fact, During the tulip period, roughly 1718 to 1730, coffee houses exploded in both number and flamboyance. Some had painted ceilings, fountains in the courtyard, even small libraries. They became stages for artists, safe spaces for nonconformists, and rumor mills for an empire trying to imitate Europe without admitting it. You glance around the cafe. The wall is newer here, a fresh coat of paint curling with damp. There's a mural in the corner, a tulip, naturally, swirling with stylized gold leaf that someone's already etched initials into. MA plus RH, it says. A love story, maybe. Or a code. You'll never know. A group at the back starts discussing Paris, not as a place of romance, but of infrastructure. Bridges, aqueducts, public lighting. They've heard tales from returning merchants of cities where water flows clean and night streets shine like day. Istanbul, they say, is behind. One of them is drawing again. An arch, a canal, something that could belong in Rome, or maybe in a dream. He's talking about civic planning. You almost chuckle. The term feels too modern for a place that still sorts its mail by memory. But that's the thing about coffee houses. They're always a few steps ahead. Quirky tidbit, during this time, some Ottoman coffee houses actually displayed mock newspapers. Handwritten sheets full of collected stories, jokes, poetry, and news, posted on the wall or read aloud by rotating editors. Think of it as a pre-Reddit bulletin board, curated by whoever stayed sober enough to scribble legibly. You listen now to a heated exchange about the new palace garden being built. It's all roses and gold leaf, one man complains, while the aqueduct leaks and the bread stalls are empty. Another shrugs. At least we have flowers to smell while we starve. Laughter. Bitter, but real. The Sufi from earlier is gone now, but his words linger. Someone quotes him again. When the state forgets its people, even the tulips wilt. Historians still argue whether the tulip period was a time of enlightenment or decadence. Some paint it as a golden dawn before the empire's final decline. Others call it a self-indulgent masquerade, where fountains flowed while the treasury dried. But in this coffee house, it feels like both. You see it in the cracked floor tiles next to a silk cushion. In the chipped cup someone still cradles like a treasure. In the man asleep in the corner with a book under his arm, snoring softly into an embroidered sleeve. You notice the kahvesib is getting up again. He stirs the coals with a slow hand, pours himself a cup, and sits beside you without a word. For a moment, the two of you just breathe. Then he says, "Do you know what coffee means in Arabic?" You shake your head. Originally? That which repels sleep. You both smile. Ironic, given how many heads are now nodding toward the tabletops. And yet, you understand. Because this drink, this ritual, this space, it doesn't just keep you awake in the body. It awakens something else. Something that dreams with its eyes open. He stands again. Disappears into the back. When he returns, he places a tiny saucer in front of you. Not coffee. Sherbet. Rose-flavored, chilled. A sign that morning is near. And indeed, the faintest thread of gold is beginning to bloom behind the curtains. Dawn is coming. But not yet. Not before the next thought. The next joke. The next quiet rebellion whispered between sips. The horizon is beginning to glow, not yet with sunlight, but with the hush of a city about to rise. You hear it before you see it. The rustle of street vendors setting up, the low rumble of cart wheels over cobblestone, the thump of a broom against a shuttered shop door. Istanbul stirs. And inside the coffee house, the last stragglers blink slowly, like owls adjusting to the day. You're still in your seat. You've made it through the dark, and now you're about to witness the coffee house in its most underrated form, as a morning refuge. Not for thinkers or rebels now, but for workers. As the early sunlight snakes between shutters, the door swings open. In walks a man with dust on his boots and a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. Behind him, a baker's assistant still speckled with flour. Then a pair of fishermen, smelling faintly of brine and kelp, drop onto stools like stones into a pond. They don't talk much. Not yet. They just sit, cup their hands around steaming mugs, and let the caffeine work its ancient magic. This is what the other side of Ottoman coffee culture looks like. Not intellectuals arguing about metaphysics, not poets reciting under candlelight, not spies or soldiers. Just people. Laborers. Servants. Apprentices. Dockhands and night guards. The kinds of men who keep the empire turning while everyone else sleeps. And the coffee house? It welcomes them like old friends. One mainstream historical fact, in Ottoman cities, coffee houses were some of the only public spaces where working-class men could rest. socialize, and access news without needing wealth or education. Long before parks, libraries, or union halls, there were cafes, open, familiar, and cheap enough for a single coin to stretch across hours. The Kahesibas, who's somehow still awake, moves with a different rhythm now. Quicker, more practiced. He knows this crowd. He pours without flourish, sets cups down with a nod, wipes the table before it's asked. A man asks, "Anything happened last night?" Another replies, "Depends where you were sitting." They share a tired laugh. The storyteller is gone. So are the janissaries. So are the Sufis and the scholars. But in their place are the unsung. The ones who don't care about tulip politics or philosophical metaphors. They just want to know if the price of chickpeas is up again. If the Bosphorus fog will clear by noon. If the ferry boat has been fixed. Still, knowledge trickles in, even at dawn. One man unfolds a handbill smuggled from a European trader. It's printed, Latin typeface, German-looking. No one can read it. But they pass it around anyway, peering at the pictures like fortune tellers. Someone points at a crude diagram of a printing press and mutters, "Soon, maybe." Another man shares gossip about a street preacher who claimed the Sultan would be replaced by a prophet. He was arrested, of course. But someone says he had a following. You can see their faces flicker with something between doubt and hope. They sip their coffee deeper after that. And then the games begin. Not the intellectual chess of last night, but backgammon. Always backgammon. The clack of the dice, the soft scrape of wooden tokens sliding across a worn board. It sounds like the heartbeat of the room. You watch two old men play without speaking. They don't need words anymore, just raised eyebrows, the occasional snort, and the shared comfort of routine. A third man watches and critiques every move. No one tells him to leave. He's part of the furniture. Quirky tidbit, some Ottoman coffee houses actually became known for specific games. One might be the backgammon cafe, another for dominoes, another for storytelling. Regulars would visit not for the coffee, but because they were the reigning champion of some obscure, regional variation of a board game that probably had 5 sets of unwritten rules. Historians still argue whether these humble cafes helped build the foundations of civil society or merely offered a distraction from daily hardship. Some argue that these gathering spaces laid the groundwork for social cohesion among classes that had no political power. Others claim they lulled the masses into complacency, numbing dissatisfaction with endless cups and endless chatter. But here, now, as the men lean in over their boards, you see something else: dignity. Earned quietly. Worn like a threadbare vest. These men are not here to argue with the empire. They're here to survive it. Someone sneezes. 3 men immediately mutter blessings in unison. No one misses a beat. Your own cup is empty again. You consider leaving. But instead, you watch the light shift, watch it stretch longer shadows through the latticed windows. The world outside is growing louder, but the coffee house remains steady. A man walks in with his son, a boy no older than 10. The boy is sleepy, his small hand wrapped in his father's. They sit at the edge of the room, and the father teaches him how to hold the cup. 2 hands. 1 breath. Small sip. A ritual passed down, not in books or sermons, but in practice. In habit. In presence. You realize this child will one day tell stories about this place. Not grand ones, but true ones. About how his father sipped bitter coffee before sunrise. About how the men here laughed without money. About how even the silence tasted rich. And just then, the muezzin calls the first adhan of the day, Fajr. It echoes across rooftops and slips through the cracks in the coffee house's wooden bones. The men begin to stir. Some stand and stretch. Others offer final rolls of the dice. Someone gathers the last of the coals into a pan, stirs the embers, and lets them die. You rise too, stretching limbs stiff from hours of stillness. But part of you doesn't want to leave. Because now you understand. The empire may be grand, the palace gilded, the viziers powerful, but this little space, with its chipped cups and sagging stools, this is the real heart. Quiet. Resilient. Awake. Always awake. You step outside just as the city exhales its first full breath. The breeze is cool, threaded with the scent of damp stone, yeast from the bakeries, and smoke curling from early morning hearths. Istanbul begins to yawn, but you don't go far. Because just across the street, nestled behind a narrow archway, almost hidden unless you know to look, is another coffee house. Smaller. Simpler. Quieter. And so your journey continues, Not because you're chasing novelty, but because you're starting to understand something deeper. No two Ottoman coffee houses are the same. This one smells of cardamom. The clientele is different, older, more subdued. A few men read from books in the pale morning light, but most simply sit. The kind of sitting that looks like prayer but sounds like silence. You take a spot near the window. The Kahesi Bazir doesn't speak. He just nods. Within a few moments, a small cup appears in front of you, balanced on a saucer, gently steaming. You take a sip, and this one is stronger, darker, dusted faintly with cinnamon. Your palate's grown sophisticated since yesterday, or was it only last night? Here, you notice a pattern that didn't exist across the street. The cups are thinner, the porcelain cracked delicately like spiderwebs. The tables are arranged in pairs, not clusters. And a small cat sleeps under the stool next to you, clearly irregular. This cafe is what some call a listening house. Not because people perform here, but because people don't. They come to hear the world breathe. To sit with their thoughts. To eavesdrop gently on the rhythm of the city waking up. One mainstream historical fact: while many Ottoman coffee houses were vibrant and noisy, others, especially smaller neighborhood cafes, served as places of quiet reflection. Some even posted written or verbal rules: no shouting, no arguing, no dice. Only coffee, books, and breath. You glance around. There's a man writing in a notebook, very slowly. Another is sketching what appears to be the silhouette of a mosque. A third is simply watching the play of light across his cup, as if the shifting reflections are saying something important. And maybe they are. A whisper of laughter from the back. Someone is gently correcting another man's Arabic pronunciation. They're not mocking him, just helping. The student smiles, tries again. Rama, he says. Not Ram. A subtle difference. A whole universe of meaning. Quirky tidbit: some coffee houses were known not just for their atmosphere or clientele, but for their specialty words. Patrons might come to one cafe to learn poetry, another to practice Persian, a third for riddles and brain teasers. The entire city became a map of oral knowledge, an unprinted library you walk through. Here, someone places a folded paper into a crack in the wooden beam near the back. You only notice because the cat stretches and blinks in that direction. When the man leaves, another arrives 20 minutes later, retrieves it, and walks out without a word. You blink. Did that just happen? It did. And it wasn't the first time, because this coffee house, despite its quiet, is part of something much bigger, a network. A web of cafes that stretch across Istanbul, across the empire, each one carrying bits of information like a bloodstream. Word of a ship delayed in Izmir. A letter confiscated in Damascus. A scholar fleeing Baghdad. A grain surplus in Sofia. News, smuggled in steam. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee houses functioned as a true communication system. Some claim it was all rumor and gossip. Others insist they acted as the de facto newsrooms of the empire, faster than official dispatches, more trusted than royal proclamations. What's certain is this: by the time anything reached the palace, it had already been sipped, whispered, debated, and laughed over in 50 different cafes. The street knew first. Back in your seat, the morning sun hits your cup just right, casting a golden ring inside the rim. You remember something the Sufi said: everything leaves a trace. Even steam. You nod to yourself. It's true. The man beside you closes his book and leaves a small wrapped parcel on the table. No one touches it. Not yet. But someone will. Outside, the street is busy now. The city has fully awakened. The scent of roasted chestnuts wafts in, and a fruit vendor shouts in a sing-song voice. You hear a school bell. A donkey brays somewhere in the maze of alleyways. But inside the cafe, it's still dawn. Still sacred. Still safe. And for a moment, you think, if the empire ever falls, if the palaces crumble, if the names of sultans are forgotten, someone will still be sitting here, drinking coffee, quietly rewriting the world. You leave the quiet cafe with a lingering sense of reverence. Not for any deity in particular, but for the rhythm of the place, the ritual, the way time bends gently around a cup of coffee and a pause. The sun is higher now, brushing the rooftops with gold and igniting the domes into molten silver. The city is fully alive. But your journey isn't over, because you've heard whispers all night, through jokes, debates, grumbles, and songs, about a very different kind of coffee house. Not one nestled in the neighborhoods or hidden under mosque courtyards, but one floating on the edge of change. The kind that doesn't just reflect the empire, it challenges it. You head toward the waterside, weaving through tangled lanes where laundry flutters like flags and pigeons scatter ahead of your feet. There, perched along the Galata district, stands a larger building with a wider doorway. Above it, a sign, faded but unmistakable, stylized tulips, crossed pipes, and the symbol of a cypress tree. A known spot. A watched spot. This is one of the reformer cafes. It doesn't look like much. A little too clean. A little too organized. The cushions still have shape, and the floor doesn't creak when you step inside. Suspiciously well funded, if you're honest. Inside, a younger crowd fills the benches. No turbans. No prayer beads. Waistcoats. Coats from Vienna. A few wear the fez, a symbol the empire itself hasn't even fully adopted yet, but here, it's trendy. Defiant. They don't stop talking when you enter. In fact, they barely notice you. One man stands at the center, gesturing wildly with a folded newspaper in his hand, not a handwritten bulletin, but a real, printed paper from a European press. "Do you see?" he says. "In England, the parliament meets openly. The people debate their laws." Another snorts. "And hang each other afterward." But the room chuckles. This isn't a place for sullen brooding. These men are animated, restless, hungry. Their coffee comes with cigarettes now. French matches. Someone near the window is sketching something that looks suspiciously like a guillotine, though he insists it's just a sculpture idea. One mainstream historical fact: by the early 19th century, Ottoman coffee houses became hotbeds for reformist thinkers, many of them influenced by European ideas about constitutional monarchy, secular education, and representative government. These cafes often operated at the edge of legality, with secret police monitoring patrons and occasional raids when talk became too bold. The man holding the newspaper is now drawing a map of railways, postal routes, communication lines. He's not a general. He's a school teacher. But in here, that means something. Because education is power. And power doesn't always wear armor. Across the room, someone's reading Rousseau aloud. In translation, of course, but the rhythm remains. "Man is born free," he says, "yet everywhere he is in chains." Everyone nods, as if they've always known this, but needed to hear it aloud. You sip your coffee. It's stronger here. Less bitter. Maybe it's the sugar. Someone at your table leans towards you and whispers, "You know they'll shut this place down by the end of the month." You raise an eyebrow. "Or maybe they won't," he says, almost hopefully. "Maybe they'll realize we're not the threat." But you both know better. Quirky tidbit: some reformist coffee houses began holding mock parliaments, complete with chairs arranged in rows, someone acting as speaker, and others pretending to represent fictional provinces. What began as satire often became dangerously earnest. Historians still argue whether these cafes were the spark that lit the reform movements of the late Ottoman era, or just pressure valves, allowing dissent to fizzle out in harmless smoke. Some argue that the real reforms came from above, from enlightened sultans and bold viziers. Others insist that it started right here, with a group of underpaid scribes, angry poets, and over-caffeinated dreamers who simply refused to shut up. You watch a debate unfold about factory rights. Factory rights. In the Ottoman Empire. The man speaking waves a small booklet, handwritten, mimeographed, probably banned. Another man cuts in: "The Sultan's decree will never reach the dock workers." A third: "Then the dock workers must write their own." The room hums. And in that moment, you see it. The empire doesn't just sit on a throne. It also sits here, on a worn bench, beside a cracked table, in the hand that scribbles counter-arguments into the margins of a pamphlet no one dares print. You lean back. You're not sure if you agree with everything being said. But you don't have to. That's the point. Because here, in this caffeine-fueled battleground of ideas, disagreement is sacred. And the coffee? The coffee is the currency of engagement. Someone calls out, "Another round." The Kahvesibas nods. He doesn't smile. He knows what this place is. He also knows who's watching from the alley across the street. But still, the cups arrive. Still hot. Still dark. Still defiant. Because even in an empire weary with its own weight, even with spies outside and bans looming overhead, the coffee is still being served. And for now, that's enough. And now, just like that, it's late morning. The sun stands higher in the sky, casting sharp light through the narrow streets and gilding even the cracked stone with a kind of tired beauty. The city is in full motion now, vendors hollering in overlapping cadences, donkey carts trundling past, water boys shouting for empty jugs. Istanbul has awoken completely, bustling and unbothered. But inside the coffee house, Time slows again. You've returned to your original seat, somehow drawn back to that familiar spot like a compass needle to its north. The coffee buzz gives you a knowing look, not surprised you came back, not exactly welcoming either. Just aware. He slides over a cup without being asked. No questions, no nods. At this point, you've earned it. The other patrons have changed again. There's a new wave now, merchants between deals, postal clerks sneaking in 10-minute breaks, young scribes still clutching wax-sealed scrolls, and that one elderly man with the perpetually confused cat peeking from his satchel. It's no longer the world of mystics or revolutionaries. This is the everyday empire. The one that sips and reads. That nods and shrugs. That keeps the gears turning. You sit quietly, cup in hand, letting the sounds wash over you. No drama. No crisis. Just routine. The kind that sustains a civilization more effectively than any sultan's decree. One mainstream historical fact: by the mid-19th century, coffee houses had become embedded in the daily rhythms of Ottoman urban life. They served not only as rest stops but as unofficial post offices, temp offices, hiring halls, and information centers for communities across class and religious lines. They even started appearing in court records, not just as sites of sedition or scandal, but as witnesses. A man would swear he had seen something while sipping coffee near Oxerai Gate. Another might say, "Ask the men at the Coppersmith's Cafe, they'll confirm." In a city where bureaucracy tangled itself like fishing nets, the coffee house was often more reliable than an official stamp. But that doesn't mean it was boring. Even now, you hear flickers of curiosity in the air. A group of Armenians near the window are arguing about music theory. An old Greek man is reading aloud from an almanac, pausing every so often to demand someone explain the lunar calendar. Two boys, barely teens, are sketching out a fictional map of a city made entirely of coffee shops. You can't help but chuckle. Quirky tidbit: toward the end of the Ottoman Empire, one satirical journal joked that Istanbul was half water, half coffee, and if the city ever ran out of either, its heart would stop. Another writer described a fantasy where a single coffee house stretched from Galata to Mecca, serving every citizen and solving all political disputes with backgammon. Historians still argue whether the late-era coffee houses dulled the edge of Ottoman culture or preserved it. Some claim that as newspapers rose and new political institutions formed, the café lost its centrality. Others believe it adapted, becoming a bridge between the old oral world and the written one, between imperial grandeur and modern simplicity. You look around and wonder if they're both right. Because even as men start opening newspapers, real, ink-smudged ones, you can hear someone in the corner reading a poem aloud. Someone else hums a folk song under their breath. And you? You're just watching the swirl of steam above your cup. The same steam that floated over viziers and rogues and wandering mystics. Over Sufi chants and staged parliaments. Over artists and janissaries and dock workers and princes who slipped in wearing plain cloaks just to listen. It's all still here. This tiny porcelain cup in your hand is filled not just with coffee, but with the memory of centuries. The Kahvesibaz returns to wipe a nearby table. He doesn't interrupt your reverie, but as he turns, he says softly, "You've seen a lot." You nod. And he adds, "You've only seen one street." It lands like a parable. Because he's right. This one street, this one district, this one sliver of the empire has held more than you could ever fit in your mind, let alone your notes. And there are thousands more. Cafes that cling to mountain edges in eastern Anatolia. Coffee shops nestled in desert caravanserais. Tea houses now rising in preference in Beirut and Damascus, but always with that same soul, the ritual, the conversation, the flickering lamp, the shared pause. Outside, a distant cannon shot cracks the air, ceremonial. Noon. You finish your cup. This one is a little too bitter. Or maybe your tongue's simply too tired. You don't ask for another. Instead, you stand. The bench creaks. A cat darts under your foot and vanishes beneath a curtain. The Kahvesibaz gives a final nod, and you offer him a quiet thank you. Not because he served you well, but because he kept the story intact. You step outside into the blinding light. And as the door swings shut behind you, you realize, the empire may fall, may fade, may fracture, but as long as there's one man pouring coffee for another, something of it survives. A warmth, a whisper, a place to sit. And now, as the final echoes of footsteps fade behind you and the last curl of steam vanishes from your memory, you begin to drift, not just away from the coffee house, but deeper into rest. The stories of revolutionaries, mystics, poets, and dock workers settle like dust on an old velvet cushion, each one gently closing its eyes. You feel your breath slowing now. The city, once so noisy and wild, softens into a gentle hum. Even the cobblestones seem quieter. The coffee, still lingering on your tongue, turns from bitter to warm, from sharp to smooth. You walk no longer. You float. Around you, the flicker of lanterns becomes dimmer. The laughter fades into echoes. The cups are washed, the coals cooled, the cats curled into corners. Istanbul shrinks to a sigh. And the empire, once so large, so loud, so full of opinions and laws and edicts, shrinks, too, down to a single room. A single cup. A single moment. There are no janissaries here now. No spies, no storytellers, no noblemen pretending to be commoners. Just you, and the soft, forgiving dark. And in that dark, you begin to understand. The coffee house was never really about the coffee. It was about stillness. About sanctuary. About the human need to gather, to share, to sit for a while and watch the smoke rise. So close your eyes now. Let the last of the warmth settle in your chest like a coal that won't quite go out. Let the city sleep. Let you sleep. And know, somewhere far away, under the shadow of a minaret or beside a worn wooden table, someone is pouring another cup. Not in a rush. Not for profit. Just because that's what we do. We sit. We sip. We remember. Sweet dreams.
Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay nó không có đỏ. Máy xịn kìa chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán